Welcome to Filmmaker U. I'm Gordon Burkell, and we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. Every Friday, we go live 2 p.m. with a film professional to give you a chat and allow you to ask questions. Today, I'm joined by VFX artist Chris Healer, whose latest VR project is the VR experience for the Illinois Holocaust Museum. It's called Journey Back. Hi, Chris. How are you today? Nope, we have a few. There you go. Can you hear me? No, I can't hear you. There we go.
Okay.
How are you doing, Chris?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, thanks. So I've never worked on a VR project. So can you take me through what would the process be for something big like this, where it's you're building an experience? Like how does that even start? Like what's the pipeline? What's the workflow?
Trying to think of a starting place. Well, see, so Journey Back, we'll focus on this project. How about that?
Sure.
So Journey Back is the story of, well, there's two parts to it. There's one featuring Fritzy and one featuring George. So there's kind of a male perspective and a female perspective. These are actual Holocaust survivors who survived concentration camps and now are obviously, kind of in their upper years, but they're recalling what happened and how they coped with it afterwards. And then we kind of recreate their story or aspects of their story using archival material and actual material captured in Poland and other places, So this is a unique project because it's 360 video and volumetric video in a Unity game engine and shot over green screen and stereoscopic and ambisonic and 8K and 60 frames a second. So it's like almost the perfect storm of the hardest things. Like one, there's a few production techniques. One is shoot everything 360 video, stereo or not, and then you edit it normally, and there you.
Oh, I think we've frozen here. Did we lose Chris? I think we might have lost Chris here. So please bear with us while we try to figure out what's going on with Chris's connection here, and we'll hopefully be back soon. Oh, there he's gone. Hi, Chris.
Hey, I'm back. Sorry.
Not a problem. So we lost you when you were talking about it being the perfect storm of 8K and atmospheric sound and everything.
Right. So one production technique is you shoot everything photographically. Another one would be you build everything in a game engine. So obviously, when you shoot photographically, you're ending up with either monoscopic or stereoscopic 360 footage. Um, and when you build in a game engine, you're building real geometry as a game engine and able to navigate around through it. If you shoot as 360 video, then that is viewable on lots and lots of devices because it works in everything from a cardboard all the way up to a big fancy Vive or Oculus or whatever. The game engine is fully rendered in real time, so you've got to have a pretty powerful machine to run it on, and probably like a Vive or an Oculus tracking system to go along with it. So for this project, we actually combined both. So in the game engine, it plays segments of 360 video and skips back out to volumetric video. So the volumetric content is actually photogrammetric scans from Poland, from Auschwitz, and it's pretty stunning to take photogrammetric. Basically, it's a combination of LiDAR and photogrammetry to arrive at like we have a great scan of the interior of a gas chamber, which is like stunning to see. That it's, you can feel the size and the dirtiness of it and everything. So so it's been well, and then add to that the 360 video sections also are largely shot over green screen. So there's also a visual effects component. So it's pretty complicated project. I've done things in Premiere with this that I have never had to do before. I have a 6-channel audio mix for ambisonic audio, and also we're rendering out of Premiere in log space, and then Unity's converting log space to linear because H.264 encoding works better that way. So it's been a really fun challenge.
So now, it's going to live at the museum, or is this something that people can access at home?
So we've rendered out the volumetric sections as 360 video, and that lives on YouTube now because we just did our Sundance submission. It's kind of a hidden link because obviously we want to get through the festival process. And it's actually the installation is actually built to merge with the space at the museum. So like when you go to the museum, you walk into a space, and it's kind of got these picture frames on the wall, and it's like kind of a unique wedge-shaped space. When you put on the headset, the space matches that exactly. So you could actually be there and have the headset on and like look back and forth, and things are going to line up exactly. But for Sundance, we don't know yet if they're actually doing a physical space for Sundance. So we'll probably change that opening to be a more generic, kind of just it's almost like we call it the frame space. It's like photos on the wall that represent kind of moments in their lives. But obviously when you do it at Sundance or at any other film festival, you don't have the reference of the room you're actually sitting in. So that doesn't make sense. So we'll probably we'll put another version together that has just a volumetric opening and closing room. And I don't know if it's going to be just released widely as a YouTube link you can watch. I think there's a bunch of sites you can probably buy a membership or something. Obviously, the goal is to get people to come to the museum. The museum is super cool. They've really got some, obviously the subject matter is pretty intense, but they've really embraced a lot of different forms of technology for showing it. So our piece really fits into their ensemble, their kind of gallery showing. They have another really cool piece that they filmed, I don't know, thousands of hours of survivors talking. And then they put, so literally thousands of hours. And then they took those interviews with them and converted it to text, and then made that text searchable. So actually the exhibit is you walk up and ask questions, and then it searches the database for an answer and comes back with an answer. So it's as if you're having a conversation with the survivor. It's super cool. So they're, they're pretty tech forward with what they're doing and how they present. It's pretty neat.
How do you, for this project, how do you structure a story for VR? Because you can't really control where people are going to look. And
Yeah, I mean that's one of the real. I don't want to say it's a problem. It's a challenge in that if you if you think of it like a movie, it's frustrating, where you're like it has to be perfectly framed this way to catch the point, and you want to lead your eye this way, and you want to smash cut to this thing. A lot of times the how you guide the story is where the action is, but also by not requiring, like expecting people to explore, and then um, allowing like we use voiceover in sections, not exclusively, but voiceover, which then makes the user not like they don't know where to look, and so they start to explore. And then the voiceover, there's a section in the barracks. They're talking like the barracks are super creepy. It's rows upon rows of bunk beds where everyone would live, but it's almost kind of like an internment space. People would live there for months, and some people would only live there for a few weeks, and some people would be shipped off somewhere else. So it's like constantly in transition, and we have these great scans of it. And so you're hearing in voiceover talking about, people stealing from each other in the barracks or trying to find food, or how skinny people got. And as you look around, it almost doesn't matter where you're looking. Whatever's being said, it chimes in with something, and you're like, because I've obviously, I mean, we put 200 or 300 photos in there, and it's like I put everyone in. We had to color correct them, we had to align them, we had to do, and even still, I find things when I watch it where I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that guy, you can see his ribs. I never noticed that before. Just little details that that make it really rewatchable and make it kind of non-linear in an interesting way. Like there's always a little bit more to find in there.
how do you, because the subject matter obviously is a very heavy subject matter. So how do you tackle this? And because you want to be as respectful as possible, but you
Right.
also want the audience to, because part of it is to experience it and get a better understanding of what it was like.
Yeah.
Um, so how do you bridge that gap? Because you don't want to be disrespectful, but you also want to,
That's a
you
big deal. It's a big deal. I mean, the way we approached it is by setting some rules when we started. And one of them is like I think there was a lot of talk about like Schindler's List, great movie, nothing wrong with it, but just if you put it in a box, you're like, okay, they cast actors, they did all the costumes, they did all the sets. There's a lot of like recreation going on.
Mhm.
We're like, we can't recreate anything because if we recreate it, we're applying what we think it should look like, and inevitably it's going to be wrong or it's going to not match someone's expectations. So everything's built out of archival material or the space as it stands today. And so we call the one is memory space, which is all archival photos. But like, for instance, in the case of the barracks,
Mhm.
or there's I actually learned a lot about the Holocaust, which is like, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I did learn a lot. Like somewhere in the process, just by way of example, somewhere in the process, I was like, why do they use gas chambers? Like, it seems like this complex apparatus, and they have to come up with the gas, and they have to dispose of the bodies afterwards, and they have to get them in there. And after people go the first time, it's like the next batch knows what they're in for. And it just seems like really, inefficient, I suppose. And it turns out that from a money perspective, it was much cheaper to buy the gas and do that and dispose of bodies than it was to buy the ammunition to just shoot them. I mean, it's terrible to talk like this, but it is kind of interesting. It's like, okay, so bullets are expensive, or certainly they were at the time, at that point in the war. And I think that's kind of common knowledge. Like, yeah, they use gas chambers. What I didn't know is that another technique they used was tunnels. and this is terrible, but they would actually have um, prisoners in tunnels mining, basically digging a hole. And then after they dug a hole deep enough, they would load it up with prisoners and then launch explosives to just close off the tunnel and then just leave them in there. And that was by far the cheapest way, as long as you have enough like mountainside and space to like keep digging new quarries. And they didn't necessarily know what was going on while they were doing it. So we have this footage of the tunnels as they are now, because some of them didn't get fully destroyed. And so within those tunnels, we put images of miners and prisoners as they were working, but it's not really recreated. It's just like we took it out of we took photography of the mining camps and put those photos in the space. And it's like, yeah, I guess there's some imagination there, but we did our best to be respectful and not invent content, but just represent it, kind of represent it impartially and just say, this, you've never seen this picture before, here's a picture. Another way that we treated it as respectfully as possible on it's called the arrival ramp, which is basically where the train would stop and then they would load up people and then they would go off to the concentration camps. So there's a lot of photography of people getting onto these trains. And you've probably seen it. It's like, here's a train with, super crowded, people loading on, no one knows what's going on. But interestingly, they're all relatively well dressed and well kept, and they have their hair, and they're like, they're not like skin and bones, which we obviously see later in the piece, but this is right when it begins. And so an interesting technique that really put things in perspective, I think very respectfully, was to take that photograph of them loading on the train. We went to the exact same location in Poland and took 360 photography. So you see the thing as it stands today with a photo overlay of how it looked back in the day. So it's like, we're not really creating something that we're not applying our opinion of like, this is how the costumes looked, or this is how we think that people are more hungry or less hungry. This is an actual photograph and this is the actual location. But, with Fritzi doing the voiceover, recalling her experience, plus the location as it stands today, which you would never know today if you were standing on the train station. You'd be like, oh, this looks like a empty train station. And it's like, it was interesting because in Poland, we were capturing the material, and one of the rules was like, they were like, don't ask us for Nazi costumes. Don't ask us for, window dressings and furniture. Like, we don't want you to recreate this world. Like, again, nothing against Schindler's List, but it's like all that research and all that stuff, they had to like ask all these questions. And the Polish government's like, no, we want to move into the future. We want people to see it as it is now. We don't want to try to recreate what it was back then. And so they were very cautious. And it's like, well, if you're doing, photogrammetric captures of the space on a technical level, what you're really doing is saying, I want to capture enough material that I can do anything with this now. One of the groups that we worked with to do the capture, his name is Konstanty, and he has a game company in Eastern Europe, and he actually did a lot of the capture work. And it's interesting because he was just coming off of a project capturing all of Chernobyl. And that was a very different experience because they weren't quite as sticky about recreating and re-representing the space. So they built a whole game where the goal is basically to escape Chernobyl, but they wanted it to be authentic. So they were actually recreating stuff. And this was the opposite. It was capture it, but don't recreate anything. So I found it interesting that they were so sensitive that it's like at this point, because we captured it at such high resolution that yeah, you can zoom in and see little bits of graffiti on the wall, and you can see how the stones lay, and super powerful.
How do you recapture when, in some instances it might still exist, or they might have left the space as is, but like, I think, I can't remember which camp it is, but I think it's Dachau, but there's one where it's just what they've done is they've gotten rid of everything but the stone outlines
Right.
of where each building was. So in that case, you can't just go in and get the images because it's no longer there. But it's
Well, right, you can't. What we did, I love it. What we did do was um, capture one that does exist, tell a whole story in there,
yeah,
and then the curve of the story is like, I mean, it makes my spine, chill, whatever, to even think about it. But it's like, at that moment in the story, it's like we're going from one person telling her story about how crowded it was in the barracks. So, but it becomes super effective to cut out of the barracks and show exactly the scene that you have described, which we're capturing from a drone actually going over the camp. And it's like okay, we just saw how crowded it was in a barrack. Guess what? There was hundreds of those, and you see that just from the outlines. So it's like I think it's still very effective um, without having to recreate. I think if we recreated it, it becomes distracting because it's so much about the art form of recreation rather than the story of what's like like it's always like this, right? The story is happening in your brain. The screen is just kind of tickling your brain to think what the storyline is. And it's
mhm.
true in movies and music and everything. It's like so as long as there's enough there for the story world to be happening in your mind, like then I think we've done our job. Um, I mean, we've showed it around a little bit now, and one comment that a few people have made is like, why do we never see the Nazis and why do we never see any real scenes of violence? And it's like, well, because it's, Fritzi, I don't know exactly how old she is now, but I know she was like, I think she was 6 years old at the concentration camp. So, so that actually works to our advantage because we tell the story from a child's point of view and in her memory. And so, like, basically, everyone was doing everything they could to guard her from seeing violence and murder, right? So it kind of like works with the story that you never actually see that because we're telling it from her point of view because everyone's kind of guarding the world from her. Um, but yeah, it's I don't know. Some of the suggestions have been interesting there because there's a lot of different um, in the museum space, there's like some people are like, we want to expose them, we want to debunk this, we just want the information out there, we just, like this was my family. There's like so many different opinions, um, and I think what we've come up with has a great value because you can show it to kids. And I think if we crossed a certain line somewhere, um, it just becomes too scary and terrible to show to like I don't know. I guess I
Yeah.
kind of got off track there, but yeah.
Well, on a I guess a better note, do you have a moment where we see liberation?
Yeah. That's
What's what's that like?
um well, see, I feel like I'm doing a spoiler if I say
Yeah.
too much. But that's kind of what Fritzy
I was thinking just to uplift the conversation a little bit.
well, the uplifting thing for Fritzy and for George is that they're well, it's like when you watch the Titanic, right? James Cameron. It's like she's telling the story the whole time. So you know that she lives. Like you're going through the whole story knowing that she lives. And really the story is saying, okay, well, how did you live? And that's kind of what happens with Fritzy and George is they're starting with, you know, this is right from the beginning, they're like, this is what kicks it off is me remembering, and then it's the story leading up to liberation and to them getting to be who they are and how they, like how do you live with yourself for the past 60 years knowing not live with yourself but live in a world where this happened as a survivor. It's like it's quite difficult. The liberation part, I think for Fritzy, like I've worked on hundreds of projects, right? And but very, very, very few. Uh, it's funny to say, but it's like it kind of makes you proud when you show someone the piece you're working on and they start crying because you're like, wow, it's actually working. Like we built this thing from nothing and it actually works. And like the liberation moment with Fritzy is a moment where a lot of people get really, really teary-eyed, and you know, and that's cool. I mean, that's cool as a creator thing. We're like, wow, it's really working. Like all the parts are working, and I think that liberation moment really sings so that you leave, you leave the piece not in darkness but in light. So it's pretty effective.
Now, like, and this might be an off-topic question and might be out of the realm, so I understand if you don't want to answer it. But like, I think about, the film Night and Fog, or I think about the book Night. All these pieces. The idea being that we have to show, we have to document
Right.
to make sure that people are aware this happened.
Right.
And yet we still have people who think that the Holocaust didn't exist or is made up. How do you think, something like, do you think something like this will help them turn a page and start to realize, or do you think it's got to be something more? Like, what can we do?
Yeah. So one of the producers on the project just emailed, I think yesterday, and they're like, because they're trying to make a plan for how they want to roll it out and which festivals are the most interesting. Obviously, Sundance is high on the list. We might try for some of the European ones like Cannes or whatever. But in there, and then of course the museum, and then the museums are kind of on a circuit, so it may go to other museums as well. But they wanted to do research to find out what cities would be most effective. And very interestingly, uh, New York scored as one of the bottom cities in terms of Holocaust awareness. Like the fewest number of people actually know what happened at the Holocaust in New York. I mean, I don't know why. Is it just that there's tons of people and they're focused on something else, or is it just starting to like slip through the cracks of kind of, the education, you know, the topic of history is starting to like cover other things, and that house somehow gets skipped. It's like I don't know, but I think I think creating kind of a boring documentary about the Holocaust doesn't advance that goal. I think doing something in VR where it's like kind of tangible and you can walk around the space a little bit and you can actually see things, it has an appeal for a younger audience that actually, and it's like visceral. So I think we're hitting good marks to do that. I think we're attracting people to be more interested, because it's not, like, if you watch the History Channel, it's like, it's all at this point, there's been so many documentaries about the Holocaust or about World War II or whatever, that it's like, you can't really make a documentary about World War II. You can make a documentary about the aircraft of World War II or the artillery of World War II or the strategy or like the women's role. And, like you have to get to a specific thing. And so, and I feel like the Holocaust is the same way, but I think what we've done is make, visceral moments where you're like for instance, the train cars that carried the people to the concentration camps. There's actually a train car at the museum that you can walk in. And probably the first thing you'll notice when you walk in is that it's only about, I think the ceiling's like maybe 5.5 feet, maybe 6 feet. Like that's the top of the car. And they're going to pack 100 people in there, right? So if I take a picture of that train car, it looks like a train car from the inside. But when you're in VR space and you're actually standing in it and you're like, and it's like funny because even the museum was like, we don't think the sizing is right. It feels like we're too tall. And we're like, no, we measured it exactly. And this is how it was like in the car. Because they had a car too. And we would, at the museum, we would go in the car and look and then come back to VR, put it on, and we're like, wow, no, it's actually accurate. Like the ceiling feels low. But that's what we want, is for people to, it's not a mistake, right? But you would never get that from a photograph. So I think that the way we're doing it causes people who are curious to actually, make these little discoveries. They're like kind of a personal discovery rather than a factual discovery that's just being spoon-fed by, by the narration or by the story. Yeah.
Was there something, because you sort of mentioned it there, that like they didn't realize how low the ceiling felt, until this experience. Was there something else that might have that the museum learned because of this, or something that sort of changed their perspective on the Holocaust?
Um, well, I think that using VR as a storytelling tool was really, um, because it's difficult. Because like your first question, you're like, how do you make something like this? It's like it's hard to answer because it's like, well, there's so many techniques and so many, it's a very fragmented space right now. It's like there's a whole bunch of different headsets, whole bunch of computers, whole bunch of capture techniques. Some is sciencey, some is artsy, some is like shoot it on your iPhone, some is a VFX. It's just very fragmented. So the process with the museum, which has been great, I think is just to, like fortunately we have a wide kind of palette, some volumetric, some 360 video, some VFX, some motion stuff, so that they can, um, you know, so that they've been through it to experience all those different techniques and what's useful. Like it was very hard to explain to some people, at the museum, like the word photogrammetry. I mean, I don't know if you've ever even heard that word or if you know what it is exactly.
Brand new to me.
But it's well because it because photogrammetry is the technique, but photogrammetric is like the adjective form. So it's like how many conversations we're like, no, we capture that photogrammetrically, right? It's like kind of a mouthful. But it just comes from photo meaning picture, gram meaning measurement, right? And then metric meaning a method dealing with measuring things from photographs. Um, so you're so I think there's a realization that like using photogrammetric processes, you can reconstruct lots of historical things that are not as easily reconstructible through other methods.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've seen any of the work coming out of like MIT or anything where they there's a really famous one where they took all of the photos of the Colosseum, as many as they could find from people's vacations, right? Just people from
Oh,
iPhones
I
and
think I did
whatever.
see this. Yeah.
And you plug them all into a giant, basically a photogrammetry solver, a point cloud solver, and it produces a model of the Colosseum from that. And I think that if we hadn't had the experience of getting into photogrammetry on this project, um, the museum may not be aware that this is a technique that we could use to reconstruct lots of things from existing photographs. Because for better or worse, the Holocaust was actually very well photographed. I mean, it was right around the time that photography, photography was getting more and more mainstream as we went. But I mean, it wasn't really a super accessible thing until like the late 30s basically.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So I have one last question to try and end on a lighter note. Um, and I ask this of everyone I interview. So, we've gone through COVID or we're still going through COVID. So, we've all sort of been working from home. Is there a show on Netflix or a movie on Netflix or some other streaming service that you would recommend to people who are still
Hmm.
stuck at home?
Hmm. I mean, you're asking like the nerdiest person in the world, so I'm gonna give you the nerdiest answer I can give you, of course.
Go
But
for it.
I think the show that I've enjoyed probably the most recently was called
Okay.
RES. Have you heard of it?
Sounds familiar, but I don't know what it's about.
I want to say it's on Hulu. I think you can probably find it everywhere now. I think it came out on Hulu, but it's kind of apropos to the topic of like VR and stuff. It's about a software developer who is uh, in task with debugging a computer system that creates a metaverse. Right, the metaverse is like it's like the concept that anything that could happen will happen, and like reality is constantly splitting on. It's like a giant choose your own adventure with an infinite number of possibilities. There's like the metaverse theory, and then there's the opposite, which is like destiny. Like, are all of our actions predestined and we're on one track and you can't hop tracks? And the show like really contemplates it in a really interesting, deep way and shows it with like, you know, beautiful graphics, good acting, good dialogue, but it also doesn't wimp out. Like for me, I appreciate that because I feel like a lot of like kind of sci-fi shows and like kind of more nerdy shows like wimp out a little bit, and you can't like it doesn't actually. They're like, you know, it's like if you cut to a screen with a bunch of computer stuff for most shows, it's like that's good enough. But like in that show, if they cut to a screen and you're a nerd and you look, you're like, oh my god, that actually, you know, that actually is what they're. It's not just a bunch of blinking, spinning text. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, actually, yes, they had really good advisors on the show to make sure that the tech talk, you know, is actually accurate, and that the philosophical you know, contemplations that they're throwing out there are like, it's real. It's like a really deeply thought out thing. I don't know if anybody who's looking for good sci-fi, philosophical sci-fi like that's a great one to watch. It's called Res.
I'm looking forward to it then.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us this week, and make sure to have a good weekend.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye.